Lost and true. Big Bill, the pig that became a legend. In the autumn of 1933, somewhere in the farmlands of Tennessee, a farmer named Elias Butler stood in his barn and made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He was staring at an animal he'd raised from birth, an animal that had become so enormous, so unnaturally massive, that neighbors had begun traveling from counties away just to see it. The creature weighed nearly 1,200 pounds. Its body was the size of a small automobile, and now someone wanted to buy it, not for meat, not for breeding, but for spectacle. The farmer hesitated, because once he sold this pig, he knew he would never see it again. What he didn't know was that the animal would soon become one of the most photographed creatures in America, appearing in newspapers from coast to coast, drawing crowds that numbered in the thousands. And then, just as suddenly as it rose to fame, it would vanish from history entirely. This is the story of Big Bill, the largest pig ever recorded, and the strange, troubling journey that turned a farm animal into a national sensation. To understand what happened to Big Bill, you have to understand what America looked like in the early 1930s. The Great Depression had shattered the economy. Millions were unemployed, farms were failing, families were desperate, and in that desperation, people craved distraction. They craved wonder. They wanted to see something bigger than their own suffering. Enter the world of sideshows, county fairs, and traveling exhibitions. These weren't just entertainment, they were escapes. And the more bizarre, the more extreme, the better. Big Bill was born on Butler's farm in Jackson, Tennessee, sometime around 1930. He was a Poland China hog, a breed known for producing large animals, but nothing about his early life suggested he would become extraordinary. For the first year, he was just another pig. Butler fed him the usual diet: corn, slop, kitchen, scraps. But then something changed. Big Bill didn't stop growing. While other pigs reached market weight and were sold off, Big Bill kept eating and growing. By his second year, he weighed over 800 pounds. By his third year, he had surpassed 1,000. Butler wasn't trying to create a giant. He was simply raising livestock. But as Big Bill grew, so did his reputation. Word spread through the region. People began showing up unannounced, asking to see the pig. Some offered money. Butler, who was struggling like everyone else during the Depression, began charging a nickel for a look. It wasn't much, but it was something. And then one day, a man arrived with a different kind of offer. His name was A.D. Free. He wasn't a farmer. He was a showman. Free had spent years traveling the country with exhibitions, displaying oddities and curiosities at fairs and expos. He had an eye for what people wanted to see. And when he saw Big Bill, he knew immediately that this was no ordinary pig. This was a headline. This was a moneymaker. Free offered Butler a significant sum, more than the pig would ever bring at slaughter. Butler accepted. In the fall of 1933, Big Bill left the only home he'd ever known. Free wasted no time. He built a custom transport for Big Bill and began touring him across the South. The pig was displayed in a reinforced pen at state fairs, agricultural expos, and livestock shows. A sign above the enclosure read, "Big Bill, the world's largest hog." And people came. Families, children, farmers who couldn't believe what they were seeing. Photographers captured images of Big Bill standing next to ordinary men, and the contrast was almost comical. The pig's back reached past their waists. His head was as wide as a barrel. He weighed, by most estimates, somewhere between 1,100 and 1,200 pounds. But here's where the story becomes more complicated. Because Big Bill wasn't just a curiosity, he was also a living, breathing animal. And the life he was now living bore no resemblance to the quiet routine of Butler's farm. He was transported in a truck, kept in pens that barely accommodated his size, surrounded constantly by noise, crowds, and lights. He was poked, photographed, stared at. And while the crowds marveled, no one asked whether this was a life worth living. In 1934, Big Bill was entered into the Chicago World's Fair, officially known as the Century of Progress Exposition. This wasn't just any fair. It was one of the largest events in the country, a showcase of innovation, culture, and spectacle. And Big Bill was one of its stars. He was displayed in the livestock pavilion, where tens of thousands of fairgoers filed past his pen each day. Newspapers ran stories about him. Radio broadcasts mentioned him. For a brief moment, Big Bill was famous. He had become a symbol of American agriculture, even though there was nothing natural about what had been done to him. But fame is fragile. And for Big Bill, it came with a cost. By the summer of 1934, Big Bill had been on the road for nearly a year. He had appeared at dozens of events, been photographed hundreds of times, and been seen by more people than most politicians of the era. But something was changing. Reports began to surface that the pig was becoming difficult to manage. He was lethargic. His legs, which had to support over half a ton of weight, were beginning to fail. There were whispers among handlers that he wasn't eating as much as he used to. And for a pig whose entire value was tied to his size, that was a problem. Free, the showman who owned Big Bill, faced a dilemma. The pig was still profitable, but he was also becoming a liability. Transporting him was expensive, housing him required custom accommodations, and if his health continued to decline, the spectacle would lose its appeal. Free needed a solution. He found one in an unexpected place, the Tennessee State Fair. In the fall of 1934, Big Bill was brought back to Tennessee, where his story had begun. He was displayed at the State Fair in Nashville, billed once again as the world's largest hog. Crowds turned out, but this time, something was different. The pig that had once seemed almost mythical now looked tired. His movements were slow. His eyes, according to some who saw him, seemed dull. The spectacle was starting to feel less like wonder and more like something else, something uncomfortable. And then, just weeks after the fair ended, Big Bill disappeared from public view. There were no more newspaper stories, no more photographs, no more tours. For decades, historians and journalists who tried to track down what happened to Big Bill came up empty. Some speculated he'd been slaughtered for meat. Others believed he'd been sold to a private collector. A few thought he might have simply died of natural causes, his body too large to sustain itself any longer, but no one knew for sure. Big Bill had vanished. It wasn't until the late 1990s that a researcher named Margaret Hollingsworth, digging through old agricultural records in Tennessee, found a clue. Buried in the archives of the Tennessee State Fair was a single receipt dated November 1934. It was a payment made to a rendering company. The amount matched the estimated value of a hog weighing over 1,000 pounds. Hollingsworth cross-referenced the date with newspaper accounts and fair records. The timing aligned. Big Bill, it seemed, had been sold for rendering. His body had been processed into lard, soap, and fertilizer. The pig that had drawn crowds of thousands, that had appeared in newspapers across the country, had ended his life in an industrial facility, reduced to raw materials. This discovery raised questions that had never been asked while Big Bill was alive. What had the spectacle cost him? Was his life, however brief and strange, worth the entertainment he provided? And who, if anyone, bore responsibility for what happened to him? To answer those questions, you have to understand the culture of animal exhibition in early 20th century America. Animals were not seen the way they are today. There were no animal welfare organizations with real power, no regulations governing how livestock could be displayed or transported. The idea that an animal might suffer psychological or physical harm from being exhibited was not widely considered. Animals were property. They were tools. And if they could generate profit, that was justification enough. Big Bill wasn't alone. The same era produced other famous exhibition animals. Jumbo the elephant, who was worked to death in a circus. Topsy the elephant, who was electrocuted in a public execution. Countless dogs, horses, and exotic creatures paraded through sideshows and fairs, their welfare secondary to their novelty. Big Bill was part of a larger system, a system that treated living beings as objects of spectacle. But there's another layer to this story. Because while Big Bill's life was undoubtedly exploited, he was also, in a strange way, loved. The people who came to see him weren't malicious. They were curious. They were searching for something in a difficult time. They wanted to believe in something larger than life. And for a moment, Big Bill gave them that. He was a giant in a world that felt impossibly small. The tension between those two truths, between exploitation and wonder, is what makes Big Bill's story so difficult to reconcile. He was a victim of the time he lived in, but he was also, for a brief moment, a star. After Big Bill's death, his story faded quickly. By the 1940s, he was barely remembered. The fairs moved on. New attractions replaced him. The world was consumed by war, and a giant pig from Tennessee seemed like a relic of a simpler, stranger time. But every so often, his name would resurface. A local historian would write an article. An old photograph would be rediscovered in an archive, and people would ask the same question: was Big Bill real? The answer, verified through records and photographs, is yes. Big Bill was real. He weighed somewhere between 1,100 and 1,200 pounds. He was, by all credible accounts, the largest pig ever recorded. But the details of his life remain murky. We don't know exactly how he was treated behind the scenes. We don't know if he experienced pain. We don't know what he felt, if anything, during those long days on display. What we do know is that his story reflects something fundamental about human nature: our desire to see the extraordinary, our willingness to commodify life for entertainment, and our tendency to forget what we've consumed once the spectacle is over. In recent years, Big Bill's story has been revisited by animal rights advocates and historians who see in him a cautionary tale. They point to the way he was bred, not naturally, but through human intervention, the way he was fed to maximize size regardless of the toll on his body, the way he was displayed, transported, and ultimately discarded. They argue that Big Bill's life was not a triumph of agriculture, but a tragedy of excess. And they're not entirely wrong. But there's also a sadness to how completely he's been forgotten. Big Bill drew crowds that numbered in the tens of thousands. His image was printed in newspapers from New York to California. For a moment, he mattered. And then, almost overnight, he didn't. His body was rendered into industrial products. His story was filed away in archives that no one read. He became, like so many others, a footnote. There's a photograph of Big Bill that survives in the Tennessee State Library. It was taken at the Chicago World's Fair in 1934. In the image, Big Bill stands in his pen, surrounded by a crowd of onlookers. Their faces are obscured by shadow, but you can see their posture, leaning forward, captivated. In the center of the frame, Big Bill stands still, his massive body almost too large for the composition. His eyes are half closed. He looks tired. It's a strange image, powerful in its simplicity, because it captures both sides of his story: the wonder people felt when they saw him, and the quiet, unspoken cost of that wonder. Big Bill lived for approximately 4 years. In that time, he became the largest pig ever recorded, a national sensation, and ultimately, a forgotten casualty of a culture that valued spectacle over substance. His story raises questions that still resonate today, about how we treat animals, about what we're willing to sacrifice for entertainment, and about what we choose to remember. So here's the question: was Big Bill a marvel of nature or a creation of human excess? And if the answer is both, what does that say about us? If you enjoy uncovering stories history left behind, consider subscribing to Lost and True.